Oh, hang on, Benito. Oh, you can't do this. This is unacceptable. Well, I thought I'd drum up some more trade into the West, to boost the viewing figures up. No, but you can't do that. No, this is a revision video, mate. Okay, but can I show some best bits? Absolutely not, Benito. You know what? I've been sick of these frivolous introductions at the start of each revision video ever since it started. It has to stop. I want to learn about some phylogenetics. You know what I'm saying, Benito? Well, I understand your point of view, but yeah, okay. But anyway, for those of you who are interested, it's still on YouTube now, and I'll post a link in the description below. Get on with it, man! Oh.
Hello everyone, and welcome back. It's another revision video. I hope you've all recovered from all that partying over Christmas and you're ready to do some phylogenetics. Who am I kidding? Who's ever ready to do phylogenetics? Now if we think back to last time where we did Hardy-Weinberg equilibria, that was all about microevolution. Today, phylogenetics is all about macroevolution, so evolution beyond the species level. Now the whole of modern macroevolutionary analysis basically depends on phylogenetic trees. So in this video we're going to be talking about how we go about building a phylogenetic tree. And this really is key for our understanding of all the zoology, botany, microbiology, paleontology, loads of stuff. You can also talk about it below the species level when looking at comparative genomics, looking at protein families and see what's related to what. But we're not going to bother with that in this video. We're just going to be talking about how we classify and how we arrange different species. So how do we go about building a phylogenetic tree? Well, it's all based on homologies, comparing homologous features between species to see how similar they are, and through that we can make a prediction on how related they are to each other. And we can compare these either through morpho-analysis, so just looking at morphological features, or what's more commonly used these days is molecular analysis, so DNA sequencing and all that. So here's an example of a phylogenetic tree, and what we can see here, it shows we've got these species here, so 10 species, and it shows how related they are to each other. So A is more related to B than it is to D, for example, and so on. So what we see, we have branches and they're all connected by these nodes here. And they can be terminal nodes, so ones at the end of the tree which don't connect to anything else, and internal nodes which are within the tree here. Now length of branches is actually quite important in phylogenetic trees. They either represent the amount of mutations that might have occurred, or it could represent time. Either way, it gives an indication on the amount of evolution that occurred before two species split. So before A splits into B, for example. Now usually the terminal nodes on a phylogenetic tree represent species because they're the smallest diagnosable group you can put on a phylogenetic tree. So letters A to J here are all species. Now the internal nodes all have what is known as a cardinality. What cardinality basically is the amount of branches which are incident on it. So, for example, let's take here, this internal node here. That has a cardinality of 3 because we have 1, 2, 3 branches sticking out of it. Now if you have a cardinality of 3, that's what's called a dichotomy. That's because we have one ancestral lineage and 2 descendant lineages coming off it. Okay? So a dichotomy. Now you may be able to spot that every split on this phylogenetic tree actually is a dichotomy. Same thing here, same thing here, same thing here, except one place, and that's here, the splitting of H, I and J. That has a cardinality of 4 here. Now anything which has a cardinality above 3 is what we call a polytomy. So here. Now polytomies can either be hard or soft. Hard polytomies shows that there is a multiple speciation event. So these 3 species, H, I and J, all diverged at the same time. A soft polytomy is when there isn't enough data available to split these three species any further to see what is more related to what. So it basically represents ignorance. And basically all polytomies you have are soft, because there's no way, I mean, we can't travel back in time, we're not Doctor Who, so there's no way we can look in the greatest amount of detail possible at a high enough resolution to resolve polytomies like this and be sure that a multiple species event did actually occur. So what we're saying here is that no data set is actually fully complete. There's no way we can say that to actually resolve this node here and create a dichotomy. There's certain other terminologies that we need to know, and they're all to do with groups. Polyphyletic, paraphyletic and monophyletic groups. They all sound pretty similar. What are they? Well, polyphyletic groups isn't actually a group at all. It contains a load of random stuff from more than one evolutionary ancestor. So it's like we picked a beetle, we picked a flower, a dandelion, or I don't know, a whale, a hippopotamus, and put them all together in their own imaginary group. That's basically a polyphyletic group. So in this example, let's say we put A, B, C, H and I together, right? They all have different common evolutionary ancestors, so they're a polyphyletic group. An example in the real world are worms. Worms is a very broad term and includes a whole range of clades. It's actually a polyphyletic group and not a very useful word to use evolutionary speaking. Next is paraphyletic group, which is a lot more useful. It contains the descendants from a single common ancestor. However, not all the descendants from that ancestor. Now, a classic textbook example is reptiles and birds. So, reptiles and birds all have the same common ancestor. But when we talk about reptiles, we don't normally think about birds, do we? So reptiles is a paraphyletic group because it is excluding the birds. However, if we consider birds to be reptiles, then we can then call reptiles our next group, our proper group, a monophyletic group. So that contains basically all the descendants from a single common ancestor. So A, B and C here form a monophyletic group, D and E here, or everything here forms a monophyletic group because all they have the same common ancestor, which is down here. Now, how do we start judging relatedness between species? Well, probably the simplest approach is this thing called maximum parsimony. This is its equation here. And it is quite simple. It's basically based on, wait for this, the fit of a site to a tree. And what we mean by that is the minimum amount of evolutionary changes required to produce the desired feature. Now obviously we're not just looking at one trait, we're looking at loads of traits here. So we must be comparing the maximum parsimonies of each trait to build an overall phylogenetic tree. So basically what we do, we take one trait at a time, we look at all the combinations from the set of taxa that we're looking at, and we choose the one with the most parsimonious tree. So in terms of this equation here, L is the length or the cost of a tree. So L min is the most parsimonious tree. It's the one with the minimum amount of steps. So the lower the L is, the better the parsimony. Okay, this diagram is way too small, so I've had to zoom in and I have to get in this really awkward position to explain it to you. I could just do it like that, couldn't I? No? Oh god, no. But anyway, yeah, so here we are looking at 5 taxa, and we're looking at 5 different characters. And this is a hypothetical example, and we're saying in each character, the only change is from a G into a T, so a mutation, if you like. So, let's say, for character 1 example, taxa A has a G, but all the others have a T. Character 2, taxa A and B have G's and the rest have T's, and so on. Okay? Now, on the top here, we've got 2 possible phylogenetic trees. which represent these changes. And what we're going to do, we're going to decide which is the most parsimonious. And where I've drawn the little numbers here, that is where a G turns into a T. So that's the evolutionary change that's happening here, not the other way around. G's turning into T's. So these are two different possible trees in which this change could have happened. So maximum parsimony will choose the tree with the least amount of evolutionary changes. So it's time to count them. So let's look at character 1 then. So on tree number 1 here, how many times does that change occur? Only once, right? It only occurs here. So B, C, D and E all have T's and A doesn't. So it only needs to occur once. On tree 2, it also only happens once. Okay, you see no other number 1s here. So that's 1 point to each. Character 2, well, on tree 1 it occurs once here, don't know if you can see that, and once here, so twice in total on tree 2. Here on the other hand, it only happens once here, so only once. So what we do, we add up the amount of evolutionary changes, so 1 plus 2 plus 2 plus 1 plus 1 is 7, and 1 plus 1 plus 1, I've lost count now, plus 2 equals 6. So this tree requires the least amount of evolutionary changes, so therefore it is the most parsimonious tree and is the tree that we select. Obviously there are loads of other different trees of different combinations that could have been made. So as the number of taxa that we're studying increases, and as the amount of characters we're studying increases, the amount of possible trees increases, and this increases exponentially to the point when you're studying 20 taxa, the number of trees that you could produce is bigger than the number of particles in the observable universe. So by this point, it isn't really feasible at all. In fact, if we started the analysis at the start of the universe, between 20 taxa, our computer that was sorting out would still be running today. So obviously this is ridiculous, okay? So we need a better method. And usually problems like this, like many problems in computer science, can only be solved through heuristic methods. So it's basically like a trial and error thing. So we pick a solution which may not be the best solution, but we can analyse it to see how truthful it is. So when the data is analysed, it allows you to evaluate your results, basically. And we can relate this to what's known as the travelling salesman problem. So a salesman wants to get in between a number of cities, right, and wants to pick the best possible route. As the number of cities you want to visit increases, then the chances of finding the best route possible between the cities decreases. So although the route you're taking isn't the best possible route, you can compare it with other routes you've taken to see whether it's better. So you may not be finding the best way, but it's a good way of kind of getting there, even if the chances of actually getting the best possible route are incredibly small. And to help us with this is a technique called Bootstrap. Now, I've got to be honest, this is one of the hardest things I've had to get my head around so far in my course, but I'm going to try my best to explain this to you. So Bootstrap basically allows you to build pseudo datasets from a standard dataset which can't be resampled in nature, because if we're checking a trait, then we can't really resample it, because within a species that trait is likely to always be the same. So random sequences, let's say random DNA sequences, are randomly sampled, randomly selected with replacement, and are aligned using sequence alignment. So as it's sampled with replacement, that means you can pick the same character more than once, so it can appear more than once in your resampled data set. What you can then do is build up BPs, Bootstrap proportions, which gives the frequency of occurrence of these groups being selected in your pseudo datasets. So you create loads of these resampled datasets, and the occurrence of each character occurring is the BP. So the greater the bootstrap proportion, the more confident we can be about the splitting, let's say, between two species. So we can be more certain that that node that we've created in our phylogenetic tree is actually the correct one. So all we can then do is build what's known as a majority rule consensus tree, which is a summary of all the separate trees that we've built from our resampled datasets. And on each node, it will give the BPs, the bootstrap proportions. So usually, if the bootstrap proportion is above 80%, about 80% or over, then we can be quite confident that that node exists and is correct, and those species did diverge. Okay, I know that was a bit vague, but I'm not gonna lie, it's a bit complicated, isn't it? So let's just skip over that, okay? Now there's something I'm a bit more familiar with, so molecular clocks. So far we've talked about how we work out how related species are. Molecular clocks are all about how we can tell when two species diverged. So this is all about branch lengths now in the phylogenetic tree. To demonstrate this, here we have two sequences. This is an amino acid sequence, not a DNA sequence, so that's why we haven't got just A, G, C's and T's here, so don't worry, I'm not trying to confuse you. And it's made of 20 amino acids. Now, they're all exactly the same, aren't they? Have you spotted the difference? Of course you have. It's here, right? So we have L and L here, and instead here we have an I and I. Okay? Now let's say these sequences are from two different species. Now from this we can calculate what's called P distances. And P distance, it has a very simple formula. It's the number of substitutions divided by the total number of amino acids in this case. So here it's 2 out of 20, so 0.1, okay? Now that's kind of useful, and it gives us an idea on the branch length we should put on our phylogenetic tree. We must remember, of course, though, that this is the evolutionary distance between sequence 1 and sequence 2, not sequence 1 in the ancestor or sequence 2 in the ancestor, because remember you've got ancestor, and that gives rise to sequence 1 and sequence 2. Okay, and we can represent the evolutionary distance between sequence 1 and 2 as D1 and 2. Now, we can say that this P distance here is approximately, so not equals, approximately, so we give it this sign, the same as D1 to 2. But however, the P distance is always going to be an underestimate of the true divergence between the two sequences. So the L may not have directly changed into the I, the L may have changed into an A, then an I, or an L, then an A, then an S, then an I. Or vice versa, I could have turned into an M, then an L. Okay? So all these things which may have occurred in between are missed out by these p-values, so that's why it's always an underestimate. Now we can say that the evolutionary distance between, say, sequence 1 and the ancestor, so let's say delta A1, ancestor to sequence 1, is equal of the mutation rate at the time times the time. Okay? And same goes for sequence 2, so distance between ancestor and sequence 2 is rate times the time. Now assuming that the mutation rate is the same in both cases, and obviously time's the same, that's obvious, so we can say that distance, evolutionary distance between 1 and 2 is 2 RT. Okay? So therefore, approximately, the P distance is 2 RT. And that gives us a very, that's actually quite powerful then, because let's say you've got the P distance, then you can estimate let's say you don't know the time, you want to know the time when they diverged, and you know the mutation rate, you can do a load of rearranging of the equation to get time. Of course, you could also rearrange it for R if you want to know the mutation rate and you know the others. And this was first found by Zucker, Candle and Pauling back in the 20th century, and they used an alpha globing clock to calculate divergence times between certain animal species. So that is the basis of a molecular clock, and that is me done for today. I must say, that was probably the hardest video I've had to do since I started doing these, so I can have a rest now, but hope you enjoyed it. Correct me if I said anything incorrect, okay, because I feel like I could have done at some point. So, thank you very much, see you next time!